the housing rental assistance HUD currently provides. Around the country, in rural, suburban, and urban communities alike, families are struggling to find decent homes that they can afford, and this problem is not new, but a result of insufficient supply over many decades. For many years, we simply have not built enough housing. Too often, efforts to build housing are constrained by local zoning and land use regulations. These rules often allow for a flawed public engagement process that gives an outsized voice to a select few who can afford to take time off from work in order to dictate what gets built and, more often, what doesn't get built. Neighbors who block new development may tell you that they are for housing in concept, just not in their backyard. And given the crisis at hand, it is time that we realize that the character of the neighborhood isn't all that matters, and that some of the arguments against more housing come from the Jim Crow era of racist exclusion. We can and must do more to overcome these barriers. The national challenge is rightfully mostly handled at the state and local level, but the federal government also has a role. In my home state of Hawaii, Representative Troy Hashimoto successfully led the effort in the state legislature to establish a working group to review zoning, regulatory, and statutory barriers to affordable housing development that will inform future legislation. Many other states are taking similar initiatives, from Minnesota to California. Here in Congress, we should support states' efforts to increase the supply of housing, and I'm encouraged by proposals in the administration's budget to provide funding for communities that update their land use and zoning regulations to allow for more multifamily housing opportunities. While vouchers help to relieve rent burdens for the most vulnerable, they'll only be useful if there is housing stock to absorb them. The fiscal year 2022 omnibus helped to strike that balance between supply and demand with a record funding for the home program and new incremental vouchers. The omnibus also reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, which included protections to help survivors to find safe housing. But during the debate on that legislation, it became clear that the lack of guidance and oversight from HUD on emergency transfers is a real problem, and one that we hope you will help us to address. In addition to serving vulnerable renters, we also need to have a better understanding of how institutional investors are changing the landscape of home ownership opportunities. We have heard many stories about the negative effects of the institutional investor owners, including unaffordable home prices and rents, deteriorating conditions, and families who simply can't compete against well-funded corporations in purchasing homes. Congress and the administration need to keep an eye on this trend to ensure that the housing market remains open and fair for everybody. Finally, we appreciate your support for the authorization of a Cdbg disaster recovery program. These flexible funds are critical to rebuilding, but the funds take far too long to reach the people who need the dollars the most. Permanent authorization is key to reducing unnecessary delays and helping families to get back on their feet after a disaster. As chair, I intend to push harder to advance these efforts within the available resources, and I look forward to working with the department on all of these items. Secretary Fudge, I look forward to your testimony and our ongoing dialogue and partnership on these matters. Vice Chair Collins, I look forward to reviewing this budget with you and turn to you for your opening statement.
Thank you. I'm pleased to join Chairman Schatz in welcoming Secretary Fudge back to the subcommittee this morning to discuss the Department of Housing and Urban Development's fiscal year 2023 budget request. The fiscal year 2022 omnibus included $65.7 billion for HUD, which was offset in part by nearly $12 billion in Federal Housing Authority and Ginnie Mae receipts. These funds provide rental assistance for seniors and low-income families, enable formerly homeless veterans and youth, as well as survivors of domestic violence, to have safe and secure housing, support critical investments in our communities that help to create jobs, reduce lead paint hazards for children, a particular interest in my state where we have old housing stock, and so much more. The administration's request for HUD is a substantial increase of more than $6 billion above current levels. Of this increase, $3.7 billion is for the increased cost of simply maintaining current rental assistance. The administration's request also assumes that FHA and Ginnie Mae receipts, which help offset the cost of the HUD bill, will be $1 billion less than fiscal year 22. Given the increased renewal costs and lower receipt levels, it is prudent for our subcommittee to take into account the pipeline of existing funding when reviewing the administration's request. 2 years after passage of the CARES Act, nearly half of the $12.4 billion provided to HUD is still unspent. A year after the American Rescue Plan, HUD has only expended 6% of the $10.8 billion it was provided. I'm concerned that HUD and many of its grantees appeared to lack the capacity to manage and oversee the influx of funding provided over the last 2 years, regardless of how well-intentioned they are. And the funding itself has been well-intentioned. The lack of affordable housing, as the chairman has pointed out, is a crisis in many parts of our country, with no state having a truly adequate supply. The very people who make our communities work, the police officers, the firefighters, the school teachers, the nurses, as well as those in the service and hospitality sectors, often find that they can no longer afford to live in the communities that they serve. That certainly is the case in parts of Maine. The solution to such housing challenges takes careful thought and coordination. The need for that approach is evident not just in the billions of unspent funding, but also in the number of unissued vouchers. HUD data indicate that PHAs already have the funding available to lease 200,000 additional vouchers above what are currently leased. These funded but unused vouchers make it clear that simply appropriating more vouchers will not address the affordable housing needs of the country if vouchers are not or cannot be leased. The supply of rental housing across the country is insufficient. The backlog of already provided funding can help address this need, as can better coordination with tax credit programs and the streamlining or elimination of burdensome and unnecessary building regulations. I would urge the department to invest more time in finding ways to expedite the administration of grants and improve its programs. One such example is HUD's determination of fair market rents. From Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, the committee has heard from public housing authorities concerned that HUD's fair market rent calculations do not reflect the increased rental prices they are experiencing in their communities. That results in households being unable to afford the limited housing options that are available, even if they do have a voucher in hand. Additionally, most of HUD's programs are operating with long expired authorizations. These expirations do not prevent the committee from funding programs. However, without program modernizations that come through reauthorization, the effectiveness of these programs can be diminished. Core programs with long-standing expired authorizations include the very important Cdbg program, home, lead-based paint hazard reduction, public housing, Section 8 vouchers, housing for the elderly, and homeless assistance grants. I hope the department will work with the authorizing committee to produce transformational changes to better serve our communities and vulnerable households. Having expressed some concerns, let me also briefly note areas of shared interest and support. I'm pleased to see the continued investment in the Community Development Block Grant Program, which provides flexible funding for critical investments and worthwhile projects in communities across Maine and the rest of the country. In addition to Cdbg, the request continues robust investments in reducing the health hazards of exposure to lead paint, particularly to young children. The request also includes funding for the Aging in Place Home Modification Grants and the Youth Homeless Demonstration Programs, which I worked to establish in previous years prior to the current change in chairmanship. Finally, I'm pleased to see that the request includes sufficient funding for renewing existing rental assistance. Madam Secretary, I once again welcome you to this hearing, and I very much look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Secretary, please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Schatz, Ranking Member Collins, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of President Biden's 2023 budget for the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Secretary, could you speak a little closer to the microphone? Thank you.
HUD's mission is central to achieving the President's vision to build a better America, to ensure that every person has a shot to get ahead, to address long-standing systemic challenges, to expand on the historic progress our country has made over the last year, and to deliver the agenda the President laid out in his State of the Union address, to build a better America, to reduce the deficit, reduce costs for families, and grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Since day one, the President has viewed housing as critical to addressing our nation's most urgent challenges. Throughout the pandemic, HUD put in place emergency relief measures that kept homeowners and renters in their homes. Emergency housing vouchers that have helped over 20,000 formerly homeless households find a place to live since July. And almost 30,000 more have been issued vouchers and are seeking housing. Public housing authorities have issued more than 53,000 emergency housing vouchers, and over 20,000 have been utilized. While the pandemic emergency may be behind us, the crisis in housing it exposed remains. This budget will help provide security and stability for the American people, advance opportunity and equity on behalf of marginalized communities, and address the existential threats posed by natural disasters and climate change. The 2023 President's budget requests $71.9 billion for HUD, which is around $11 billion more than the 2022 annualized continuing resolution. We cannot put off the critical investments this budget makes in the American people, investments that will help lay a stronger foundation for shared growth and prosperity for generations to come. At HUD, we understand that our homes represent more than four walls and a roof. Where we live determines the kinds of jobs we get, how healthy we are, and where our children go to school. The President's budget understands that too. That's why the budget provides $32 billion for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which would accommodate approximately 200,000 new vouchers. That would allow individuals and families across the country to move off long waiting lists and into safe, decent housing. The budget addresses the nation's homelessness crisis head-on by providing $3.6 billion to provide housing and services to those experiencing homelessness, which is an increase of about $576 million. The budget works to ensure that the supply of housing meets demand. It provides $2 billion for the Home Investment Partnerships Program, an anchor of the nation's affordable housing system, and $15 billion for project-based rental assistance and housing for people with disabilities and older Americans, and $180 million for the development of new units for those groups. The President's budget advances energy efficiency and prepares our existing home infrastructure for the impacts of climate change. This budget builds on the administration's commitment to investing in rural communities. It makes crucial investments in our public housing supply and supports the removal of dangerous health hazards from our homes. The President's budget also recognizes that to meet the needs of our communities, we need an appropriate level of staffing at HUD. HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. Every day, folks across our agency work to improve our citizens' quality of life through housing. The budget delivers on these promises, and I am pleased to share this request with the subcommittee. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm going to try to get 3 or 4 topics in my first round. In the context of the next appropriations bill and talking about trying to incentivize communities to reduce barriers for housing, do you think that we could establish some incentives under HOME or Cdbg, both or either? How do you think we ought to do that and think about that?
I mean, I think we need to look at all options because what we're finding is that some of these zoning and planning commission rules have been around for 100 years. We are in an environment in which the lack of affordable housing is a crisis. And so we have to take a look at every possibility. But yes, to your question, yes, we need to take a look at that. Thank you.
I want to talk to you about appraisal bias. I know that there's been a convening on this topic, and I think we should probably start at the beginning because I'm not sure that everybody knows what it is, why it's a problem, and perhaps what we can do about it. So let's start with what is appraisal bias, why is it a problem, and what can be done?
Well, to the President's credit, he asked me last year to chair a task force on appraisal bias because what we know is that as we talk about the racial wealth gap, a large portion of it is the undervaluation of properties in Black and brown communities. We have done a report which was issued last month which shows very clearly that we could put a huge dent in the wealth gap if we would just value properties in certain communities properly. We know that we have a system that right now appraisals 95% white males who are not even familiar with the communities that they are evaluating. The data that goes into alternative valuations is not appropriate because the data is skewed. We believe strongly that if we can address this problem, we can also address how valuations on people's homes, people can't get homes because the valuations are low. And I'm just going to use myself, and I'll stop with this. I live 2 doors from an all-white community. I live in an all-Black community. My house is larger than the house 2 doors from me. My lot is larger than the house 2 doors from me. But my house is valued at $25,000 less than the house 2 doors from me. And so once we can start to address and just own up to the fact that we are continuing to discriminate and redline in our housing efforts, then I think that we can make sure that we can start to deal with the racial wealth gap.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up because I do think some of this is on the private sector. We have limited tools, but I also think that appraisers are not walking around thinking that they're perpetuating institutional racism. On the other hand, if they're the ones saying, well, that's a bad neighborhood and that's a good neighborhood, there you are. There's the legacy of redlining and Jim Crow and everything shameful in our history as it relates to housing and community. So I want to follow up with you on this. It's not clear to me what we can do, but at least to shine a light on it. Go ahead.
Well, one thing is that we have started to interact with the Subcommittee on Appraisals. We have talked to the actual organization that authorizes appraisers, and they now have admitted they have a problem. They are working with us, and so we are excited about what the path forward is going to be. We are making a difference.
Well, let us know how we can help.
Thank you.
Voucher utilization. I just met with a bunch of mayors yesterday who asked us for more vouchers, and I'm of 2 minds, right? I want as many vouchers out there as possible, but if we're just pushing out vouchers and we don't have the throughput, either there's a supply problem or we don't have a throughput capacity problem at the local level or even at the HUD level, then we can declare victory and say we pushed out 1 million vouchers, but if they're not actually getting into people's hands and housing people, then what's the point? And so I want to be reassured that if we provide additional resources for housing vouchers, that we're actually getting vouchers into the hands of people who need them, as opposed to just the committee declaring victory and having a bullet point on our press release.
I think it's a combination of the two, Senator. Clearly, we do have a supply issue in many communities. But what we also know is that when we push the vouchers out, when there's an opportunity, we want people to be able to access those vouchers right away. The waiting lists are years in some communities just for public housing in Section 8. And so we want to be sure that the vouchers are available. But yes, there is a supply problem. I'm not going to even try to sugarcoat it. A lot of the vouchers aren't being used because there's no place to take them. People are not, and we are dealing with landlords who know that they can get more by not being Section 8 anymore. So we're losing people who are already in the pipeline. So like I said, I'm not going to try to make it something that it's not. That is a part of the problem as well.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Fudge, let me start with a thank you to you. I brought to your attention a problem that we're having in Bangor, Maine, where I live, where the unsheltered population has grown enormously in the past 2 years. Part of this is due to COVID, but part of it is due to mental health challenges and to a growing substance abuse, particularly an opioid and fentanyl epidemic in my state. I want to thank you for agreeing to send your program people and your regional people to Bangor to meet with city officials to see what we can do to better help the city as it is being overwhelmed in trying to assist this homeless population. So thank you. I know that in addition to your role as Secretary of HUD, that you do serve as chair of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. And one of the biggest challenges that I see when we're dealing with more chronic homelessness or even shorter-term homelessness is a disconnect between housing and the wraparound services that go to the root causes of why the person is homeless. A lot of times that's a substance abuse or mental health challenge. What is the council doing to improve the partnership between housing and service resource providers?
We have a strategic plan that is going to be brought to us sometime next month. We are prepared, at least in my opinion. We have addressed what the problem is, and I do believe we have some solutions. When you think about the fact that already we have cut in half the number of veterans who are sleeping on our streets. We know now that a large number of people who are on the streets are senior citizens and families with children. So we at least know the populations we need to address, and we are working across government agencies to be sure that we can address it. So we're having input from HHS. We have input from other agencies that are going to be able to assist us with the problem. But I think when the strategic plan comes out, you will be pleased at the fact that we have looked at all of government and what we can do to make the situation better and provide the services timely.
Thank you. I hope we can keep in touch on that issue,
Absolutely.
which I care a great deal about. I wanted to follow up on an exchange that you and the chairman had about the unused vouchers and the fact that landlords are getting out of the Section 8 program, and so there's no place, as you put it, to take the vouchers. One of the problems is HUD's process for determining fair market rents. The process simply does not reflect the reality of housing markets in communities across this nation. And this is something we've heard about from public housing authorities literally all over the country. I want to give you an example. In Bath, Maine, the HUD fair market rents are 38 to 46% below market rents. Now, Bath Iron Works, which is one of our largest private employers in Maine, has been recruiting people to come work for the company which builds naval destroyers. And they are finding that they can't keep them, in part because they can't find affordable housing, despite the good wages paid by the shipyard. And HUD has allowed public housing authorities to request a waiver to increase their payment standards, which is the maximum subsidy value of the voucher, to 120% of the fair market rent without the burdensome and time-consuming review by HUD. But again, using Bath, Maine as an example, even those higher subsidy caps are still 26 to 35% below market rents. So what is HUD doing to better align fair market rents with the actual market conditions that the public housing authorities and renters are experiencing?
Thank you, Senator. In order to really do this the right way, HUD is really going to be required to issue a Federal Register notice. We have to have public comment in order to change the formula the way it should be. We make little adjustments, as you have suggested, but in order to do it the way that is needed, we're going to have to do that. So in August, we're going to be publishing a new fair market rate formula. So you'll see that happening in August, because you're right, and it's happening across the country. But we need to do it the right way, not just make little fixes or Band-Aids. We need to actually go and put it out for public comment and do it the proper way.
I hope you will consult with the public housing authorities, which I think have a very good handle on this problem. The chairman has generously said that I could ask another question beyond my time, so I'll ask one more before yielding back to him. I do want to go to the issue I raised in my opening statement, and that is the unexpended funds. I know a lot of these funds have been obligated, but they're sitting in Treasury accounts. They're not getting down to the grantees, to the people that we're trying to help. The CARES Act was enacted more than 2 years ago on March 27th, 2020, as an emergency response to COVID. And yet, as of last week, almost half of those funds remain unexpended. The American Rescue Plan was enacted over a year ago, and only 6% of those funds have been expended, including only $1 million of the $5 billion provided through the home program. And of the emergency vouchers, there were 70,000 of them provided by ARP. Only fewer than 20,000 of the 70,000 have been leased. What is the problem here? Why isn't this money, which was passed on an emergency basis, getting to the grantees and, more important, to assist the people it's intended to help?
Well, I think there were a number of problems, and you're absolutely right, the money has been obligated, but this is the major problem. Many of these communities did not have the capacity themselves, nor did some of our partners on the ground have the capacity to stand up these new programs and to get the resources out quickly. In addition to the fact that, thanks to Congress, they received an awful lot of money all at one time. So they were trying to, in their own minds, use the money that they needed to use first. So CARES and recovery money are 2- and 5-year plans. So that's why you don't see the money in their hands, but it is obligated because they have finally realized that it is time to put in place whatever their plans are going to be. But more importantly, I agree with you 100%. So every governor and every mayor I speak to, I say to them, you need to access these resources now. And they'll say, well, we've got plans, we've obligated, but I'm with you. And I say to them, this is a matter of sincere urgency, and you need to act as though it's urgent. But a lot of it was just they couldn't do it. They just didn't have the people, the capacity to stand up the programs. And now that they are, I think you're going to see the resources moving out much faster. That's why they're now obligated. I think you'll see them leaving Treasury fairly soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Madam Secretary.
Good to see you too, sir.
So, I've been a big believer in Buy American where we can. actually was able to get something written into the infrastructure bill that would request that, and the only way that you don't do it is if you'd request a waiver. So disappointed that it now looks like a waiver has been requested from Buy American when it comes to the HUD projects and steel and so forth that might be used, meaning that we might have to default to, buying it when it's made here, from China or other places. So why did you request the waiver when there was plenty of time to prepare for it? I'd just like to know the simple answer, please.
Certainly. Part of it is just the supply. We just don't have it. They'll say steel. We just don't have enough of it. So we can't just stop and do nothing as we wait for steel to be produced here in an amount that we need. And so there will be times where, in order to continue to do our work, that we will need resources from outside of the United States. I support it 100%. Build in America. I'm big on that, and my staff knows that I am. But there are times.
So, there are other agencies, EPA, USDA, that, have those same guidelines, and they've been able to wrestle through it. And I know we've got supply chain issues, but to me, when we looked into it, it looked like it was more a question of just not being ready to do it, not that it wasn't there in our own supply chain. You're telling me that you can't find this steel anywhere within our own economy?
Not enough of it. You ask manufacturing housing people, they'll say there's no plastic. You ask, EPA and these other people don't do the same work we do. So it's kind of like comparing apples and alligators. They don't build houses. We build houses. We make sure that the supply, we don't build houses, obviously, but we make sure that the supply is available. And so they're using very different kinds of material. I promise you, Senator, in any event that we can use American-made products, I want to use them. And I instructed our staff to do that.
So then it'd be interesting to know, to date and going forward, because you're telling me that you're going to use it if you can and that you probably are using some already.
Oh, yes, we are.
It'd be nice to know what percentage.
Okay.
I think that would make a big difference if it's just a small amount that we have to find elsewhere. If it's 100%, that's a different issue. Or if it's a small percentage, I think that's a different issue. I'll wait to hear back.
Absolutely. I'll make sure you get the numbers.
When it comes to your request calls for, I think, $35 billion for the Housing Supply Fund, a new mandatory program that provides grants to state and local housing agencies. Is that correct?
Yes.
So mandatory means that it's going to happen regardless. It's similar to other mandatory spending programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I know these programs do good work. Do you think it needs to be mandatory in the sense that that means we kind of make it easy to repeat each year? We don't do budgets anymore. I'm on the budget committee, and sadly that's a useless appendage in the sense that we just don't use it as a tool. I don't think we've done one in close to 10 years. And when we're structurally running $1.5 trillion deficits, when the president's put a blueprint out there that takes us from $30 trillion in debt to $45 trillion in debt, meaning over the next 10 years, and that's understated because it's got low interest rates and a low level of inflation built into the projections. Do you think this needs to be mandatory spending? Because to me, it's just a crutch. It's a way that throughout government we don't look at the programs that are driving these structural deficits, now HUD, becomes part of it. Where does it end? Is all of government spending going to be mandatory simply because it means you got to pass a law to offset it? That to me looks like it's part and parcel of what's wrong, even though yours is a smaller amount compared to those other programs. I highlight it because it's another example of where we're getting away from how most other places work and do it sustainably.
Well, let me just say this to you, Senator. I clearly understand your concern, but we are talking about the need in this country for 4 million housing units. We are talking about a crisis in housing. So when we have a crisis, we try to address it. This is a program that is going to have to go out 10 years. We can't build 500,000 houses in 1 year. We cannot build 1 million houses in 1 year. So it's a 10-year program, and that is the only reason that it's a mandatory program, because of the length that it needs to be. We have to address the fact that we are woefully short on supply of housing in this nation. It is a crisis. And so I just appreciate the fact that the president was willing to sit back and listen to the fact that we need to start doing something now, because we have not invested in housing for a very long time as a nation. And it's a 10-year program, and that's why.
Thank you for the answers, and I would just point this out, that if you extrapolate what we're doing into the future, all the programs that do have merit are in peril, because you cannot run the biggest business in the world by borrowing what we use annually, now 30% of it, from our kids and grandkids. It will fail. At some point, we got to find out something that we need less of and prioritize the things that we know we need. Thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Schatz, Ranking Member Collins. Madam Secretary, great to be with you again. It still brings a smile to my face to say, Madam Secretary, I have a chance to work with you on housing. I am encouraged by the priorities the President set in this year's FY23 budget, as you have well articulated them. An area of concern to me, to you, and I frankly hope to all of us, is the lack of supply of affordable housing and the incredibly long wait lists. One of the things that as a county executive I knew through our housing authority was that we had folks who'd been waiting on wait lists for years and who were not able to find any reasonable path to access affordable housing. I have a bipartisan bill with Senator Kramer, the Choice in Affordable Housing, a bill that would provide incentives to private landlords to encourage them to come in and participate in the Section 8 program. I wondered if you'd had a chance to review that, had a chance had the opportunity to give me any input on your view of its potential positive impact and what else we might be doing to help expand the supply of landlords and housing available for those with portable vouchers.
Our team is looking at it. I think conceptually it sounds great, but we are looking at it. So I can't give you an answer today, Senator, but as soon as we take a better look at it, I'll get right back to your office.
I'll be in touch. I'd appreciate your active engagement, given your, I think, deep experience and real credibility in this important area. Homelessness is something I've long been concerned about. I worked for the National Coalition for the Homeless early in my career, and one of the things that struck me was the amount of youth homelessness. It's driven by a number of factors. One of them is youth aging out of foster care. There are others. We have rapidly increasing mental health challenges among younger Americans, addiction challenges. And so, while at the same time we need to provide inputs in the housing supply, we also need to have some programs that are specifically targeted to meet the needs of identified communities. And in this instance, I'll talk about youth aging out of foster care. How are you helping address these particularly pressing problems? I was encouraged to hear the President's budget includes $3.2 billion for programs related to combating homelessness. At the end of the day, the best answer to homelessness is housing, along with wraparound supportive services. What's the administration and the department got planned for this fiscal year in terms of homelessness demonstration programs?
Well, as you know, you just mentioned the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. And we just in the last couple of weeks, had a webinar with those that we know are affected by and work within that area to talk about the things that we can do to assist youth. We also know that there has been a 44% increase in interventions. So we have kept young people who otherwise may have been on the streets in housing because we've been more proactive than we have been reactive. We've got 77 communities now that do have a youth homelessness demonstration program. And so we feel as we can continue to ramp that up, that we will be more effective. But we think that that's the best program we have right now, as well as, though, working with the foster care system. Because we know that about a fourth of young people who come out of foster care, within a few months are going to be on the streets. And so we're working with them as well.
West End Neighborhood House in Wilmington, my hometown, has done a great job at demonstrating the value of support and housing availability for youth aging out of homelessness. I'd love to work with you on making sure that their engagement in this area gets recognized appropriately. For many years, I took advantage of home dollars as a county executive, county council president. We were able to invest in all sorts of effective, localized investments to address housing problems for seniors, for those who had disabilities, for returning veterans, a wide range of needs. My understanding is this year's home budget request is about $2 billion.
Correct.
Tell me, if you could, about any changes in the home program, ways that I could be a more effective partner and advocate with you. I think it is, in many ways, one of the most important foundations of the federal, state, local partnership around the provision of housing with funding that is flexible enough to meet local needs, but not so flexible as to be diverted from our core goal, which is the provision of safe, sanitary, healthy, and affordable housing.
Well, you just said the word flexible.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is what communities are looking for, is more flexibility. So when you take the Cdbg, which has some flexibility as well, and you combine that with the home resources, communities at this point are feeling good about their possibilities and the opportunities. And so we made sure that there were enough resources there to at least, over the next few years, build about 500,000 new housing units. And so we are asking communities to work with us and basically to tell us how are you going to use these resources and how many units do you think that you can build through our House America program. So we're trying to pin down some of the mayors. We've got about 80 of them right now, surprisingly, 80 different mayors, governors, et cetera, who have bought into this and said, okay, this is how many units we're going to build. We're going to get these many homeless people off the street. I think it's a great idea, and we're holding them to it, and they're kind of enjoying it, actually.
Well, if the mayor of Wilmington, Delaware is not among them, I'd be surprised. I'd be happy to help persuade him that this is a great initiative. He's a good mayor and investing a lot of effort and energy in housing, an area that he knows a great deal about and has worked hard in. Thank you for your leadership, Madam Secretary. I look forward to working with you and look forward to getting this budget request approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Fudge, for being here with us today and for all of your work at HUD. No matter where I am in my state, whether it's Seattle, Spokane, small community, large community, suburbs, housing is the #1 topic people are so concerned about. So I'm delighted to work with you to see that we can really make sure we're boosting the funding for some really important bipartisan programs. Homelessness, actually, in my state was a crisis before the pandemic. And it's something I'm really focused on. Whatever we can get passed in a budget to help people keep a roof over their head, I'm all in. I have spoken with a lot of people who've been able to get back on their feet after being unhoused because of the funding from the American Rescue Plan, whether it was emergency housing vouchers, direct payments. That's been critical. But I think one of the most significant ways that we can tackle this crisis is by providing the resources and coordination that state and local authorities need to help people on the ground and embrace the housing first model, which we know is a really successful intervention. Can you talk a little bit about how this funding request that you have would address homelessness in our communities and the urgency of this crisis?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Senator, for the question. In this budget, there's an additional almost $600 million in homelessness assistance grants so that we are dealing with people who are on the ground every day. So that's #1. Secondly, we have also requested more vouchers, and we have requested just more money for homelessness in general. Just like the $10 billion that came out of the rescue package, we have additional resources in this package just for homelessness. But I would also say that the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness has put in place what we're calling a House America plan that I was just talking with the senator about, right, where we are asking communities, and your state and your city has already signed up to be a part of it, with the resources that we had from the rescue plan, how are they going to use those to assist us in getting homeless people off the street, and what number of homeless people are they committing to us that they're getting off the street. Seattle was a leader in it. So we are excited about the fact that many other communities have come in and agreed to do the same. But there are significant resources in addition to this almost $600 million in the president's budget to deal solely with homelessness.
Okay, and the supply of affordable housing is really a critical part of this puzzle. It's not rocket science. We need more housing, and we need more affordable housing. So we've got to help our communities build it. I know that we've got $35 billion in your budget request in new housing supply fund that provides grants to state and local housing. Can you talk a little bit about how that will be helpful?
Well, there are a couple of things that we're doing. We're already working through state housing finance agencies through what we're calling the Federal Financing Bank, which is getting resources from Treasury to go to the state housing finance agencies to make lending or money for low-income and moderate-income housing affordable for builders. So we know that we're already starting to address it, because part of the problem is nobody builds it because it's not profitable. So we can make it profitable by making the money basically almost free, and that's really kind of what's happening. We're also increasing housing trust fund, which of course is for the lowest. We're also increasing, raising the cap on low-income housing tax credits. So there's a combination of things that we're doing to make low-income and moderate-income housing worth building. We're also, through this plan, through the president's mandatory plan, looking at a path to building at least 500,000 new homes. And we do believe that we can do it with the resources that are in the president's mandatory but supply plan. We've looked at it. We feel good about it. And as I have traveled the country, we have talked with the home builders. We have talked with everyone that we can think of. I mean, even down to the people who supply, Home Depot, Lowe's, whoever it may be. And they all believe that through the combination of these various resources that we can, in fact, build 500,000 new homes.
Okay, and I think we have to pair those efforts with additional tenant-based vouchers so people with the lowest incomes can afford that safe housing. And before my time's up, Mr. Chairman, I just want to mention to you an issue regarding the most recent notice of funding opportunity for the HUD VASH program. I'm really concerned that a couple technical changes made in the FY21 funding round have created some unintentional penalties for PHAs who are working with their communities to project-based HUD VASH vouchers in stable and supportive environments. I certainly support and agree with the goal of efficient voucher utilization, but I'm concerned that changes are blocking proven leaders when it comes to the VASH management, like King County Housing Authority in my state, who are operating in extremely limited housing markets, and I hope we can work together on this in the upcoming funding cycle so that we can make sure that they can continue to do what they've been doing.
We've heard the concerns, Senator, and we are talking as well to King County and others to get the feedback to see if the changes, how they're going to be affected by the changes. So we are in communication.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, cybersecurity continues to be an important issue, and we all know the life-changing effects that a hack can have on our everyday Americans. Excuse me. This can be particularly financially devastating for families that fall victim to housing-related cyber attacks. Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins is going to drink some water, and I'll turn it over to Senator Van Hollen.
All right. Well, I hope Senator Collins feels better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's great to be with you. And let me just pick up on a point that Senator Murray made about the Housing First model. You've been working with the VA to implement that model, and very successfully, and I just want to underscore my support for moving in that direction. As you know, today only 1 in 4 applicants for that housing is able to receive it, so we do need to expand the resources, and I was very pleased to see the President's budget include $1.6 billion for a 200,000 a voucher expansion, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is, I think, the largest one-year increase since the program was authorized. This is desperately needed. I was also excited to see the $445 million for the cost-effective housing mobility strategies to assist families with young children. This has been a bipartisan effort. I've worked with Senator Young for some time. We implemented a pilot program a little while back. It's successful. Can you just talk about the research that shows the harmful long-term impacts on kids who live in concentrated poverty without access to opportunity?
I mean, certainly, I don't even know where to begin. We're talking about health care. We're talking about the quality of education. We're talking about the quality of the jobs that they could get. We're talking about institutional, and I'm using that word purposely, poverty. When we don't address the issues that we need to be addressing now, it becomes a way of life that they never can seem to get out from under. So, I mean, I don't even know where to begin to talk about how devastating it can be without these resources.
Well, this is a way to accelerate the effort to break out of the legacy of redlining and other vestiges of segregation that we've seen in many cities around the country.
Well, what we do is we isolate poverty.
That's right.
And we isolate communities of color. So, I mean, yes, it's redlining, yes, it's any number of things, but when you look at it, is we have just not given people a fair shot at even trying to make it. So,
yeah. Well, Madam Secretary, I know you're committed to implementing this program, and I hope the committee will strongly support the request in this area. I know, we have to deal with budget constraints, but I will say one area where I would like to see increase, and be working with the chairman and the ranking members in the area of senior housing, the 202 program. If you look at our state of Maryland, not too far from here, in Largo, the wait for housing, for senior housing, is at least 2 years long. It would be even longer, except for the fact that some of the seniors who've been in that waiting list have passed away. So this is a desperate situation around the country. And I hope that we will support an increase beyond what's in the President's budget. I think the President had a $100 million increase there. A number of us are pushing for a $600 million increase to increase the number of units available to around 6,000, because I know that you've seen this in your travels around the country, and of course, as a former member of Congress, can you just talk to the desperate situation many seniors are facing? We're talking about individuals who have a median income of $15,000 a year, trying to make ends meet. They can't find an affordable place to live. So if you could talk about the Section 202 program.
Well, let me just say, Senator, that when we talk about a crisis in housing, seniors is a huge crisis because of the fixed income, because of the fact that there's not enough senior housing. But I would say to you that I have been talking with people even from other nations about how we address seniors who are looking to age in place and not be on the street, because we do know one of the fastest growing groups of people that are homeless today is senior citizens. Yeah. And so we want to make sure that we can not only use 202 resources, but encourage communities to use Cdbg dollars as well, and to be able to leverage their resources through 108 loans. We know that there are a number of things that we can do to increase senior housing. We just need to give the kind of assistance and education to communities that can help them, whether it be allowing them to build ADUs on their property, whether we be able to turn some of these mobile homes and manufacturing home parks. We're looking at how we do manufacturing homes in a larger way that can assist senior citizens. We're doing everything we can think of. But I think the biggest issue is making sure that people, communities, local and state governments understand the resources available to them. I don't disagree we need more money, but I think that there are some opportunities there that no one's taken advantage of at this point.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you very much. Let me resume my question. I'm very concerned that cybercrime is starting to soar in the area of housing, and it can be absolutely devastating for families that fall victim. According to the 2021 FBI Internet Crime Report, real estate and rental wire cybercrime resulted in more than $350 million in victim losses, and that ranks it as fifth in the types of fraud attacks that are tracked by the FBI. It's up substantially from $137 million in 2020 in victim losses. Madam Secretary, the budget requests approximately $66 million for the Office of Housing Counselors. Some of these funds go towards scam awareness and prevention training for housing counselors so that they can better educate prospective home buyers, first-time home buyers and renters. Given that the data suggests that this threat is soaring, is there more that HUD could be doing to help protect Americans from these scams?
Well, I think it is a huge problem, as you suggest. And so what we are looking at is how we can incorporate information about cyber fraud into our housing counseling so that they have that information before they even get into a home as we're going through the process, so we get it early on. So we're looking at how to do that, and I think that will be very helpful.
Thank you. I think it would also, when I was the chair of the Aging Committee, we held a lot of hearings on scams, and at that point, housing scams were not on our agenda as being in the top 5. If you look now, they have surpassed lottery and sweepstakes and inheritance scams and many others. So this is a growing area, and I think we need to really increase public awareness, or a lot of people will find that what they thought were down payments for a home are disappearing because of cybercrime.
Agreed.
The other issue that I wanted to mention to you are the service coordinators under the Section 202 program that help link seniors with supportive services provided by community agencies. The department funds these coordinators through a combination of direct grants and budget-based rents. However, GAO has identified that since 2016, which I realize is well before your tenure, but it shows this has been going on for a long time, HUD has been unable to provide an accurate count of the number of service coordinators that it funds. I must say, I don't understand that. We discussed this issue last year, and you advised that HUD was putting a plan in place to quickly address GAO's recommendations. Yet when we checked with GAO, we were told that there has been very little progress made toward having an accurate count of the number of service coordinators funded by HUD. What is HUD doing specifically to address these open GAO recommendations from 2016?
Let me first say that I take full responsibility for us not getting that information. I meet with GAO, with Inspector General. I meet with all these people on a regular basis. And so we do everything we can to try to be in compliance. And this one obviously slipped through the cracks, and I take full responsibility for it, and we'll just make sure that we get that, make that an urgent matter for us going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Secretary, thank you for that answer. I'm not sure I've ever heard something so blunt from a cabinet secretary, and it's really refreshing. And I have to say that, you know, members come in after they ask you a question, come in and say, she's great. So on a bipartisan basis, you've got a lot of support on this committee. That doesn't mean we always agree with you, but we're very appreciative of your service. Can you talk to me a little bit about how we can make emergency transfers in housing for victims of domestic violence a little bit smoother and easier, and what your plan is for that?
Well, we recently changed the way that we look at, well, we hired a person that specifically addresses this issue. We have a person that specifically addresses domestic violence, sexual violence, etc. She has hit the ground running, and she is doing extremely well. But it takes some time to start to change things. We know that we have started to talk to our PHAs, and we've talked to our landlords to make clear to them it is a priority. We also we're tracking it in-house. So I'm not sure exactly where we're going to end up with it and how we're going to make it a lot easier, but we are looking at it. We have elevated it to the top of our priority list. And once we get a better answer, certainly I will get it to you. But we do know it's a major problem, especially coming out of COVID.
Sure. And with housing supply constraint, it's going to be a challenge. And then the fact that the public housing authorities, have a fair amount of autonomy, it gets tricky. So I want to make sure we don't just sort of make policy and you assign a person to it and nothing happens on the ground. So this is going to take some work.
It is.
And on this one, and you're a former mayor, strategy is execution. So declaring that it should be easy is not the same as making it easy, and that's going to take some, I think, sustained effort.
Well, it is, and the good thing is with the reauthorization of VAWA, I think it's going to be easier for us because we can basically say, look, this is the law, and we expect you to follow it. These are the things that we expect from our partners. We are issuing guidance now, and we have been, and we just believe that with the new $5 million that we have in this budget for training, that we should be able to make some impact on our communities and our partners.
Thank you very much. Final question. Are you short-staffed?
Absolutely. We are. I mean, I know I sing the same tune every time I come, but this year is the first year that we've actually gained more employees than we have lost. We started out shorthanded. And with attrition, with the fact that it takes us almost 6 months to onboard employees, which we are trying to work through, I still have yet to figure out why it takes that long to hire somebody, but we're working through it. But again, this is the very first year we have gained more than we have lost. And so we cannot do the work we need to do unless we have not just bodies, but skilled bodies, people who are in the right place to do the right work. So I can't impress upon you enough how important it is.
Yeah, I agree. I come from the not-for-profit sector, and I was always frustrated at the extent to which funders, government funders, charitable funders, were always looking at trying to squeeze the administrative overhead cost to as low of a dollar amount as possible, and that sort of makes sense in the abstract because you get to say, 90% of your dollars go directly to services, but in the real world, you need accountants and oversight and managers and leaders and case managers and IT. Otherwise, nothing works. And so I don't want you. I understand the politics of appropriating money to just FTEs, right? It's nothing anybody gets to put in their campaign commercial that they sufficiently staffed HUD. But if we need to do more in that space, I don't want you to be shy about it.
Well, I would say that if there is anything that frustrates me, and a lot of things do, I think at times, but this is the most frustrating. I come from being a mayor, from being in Congress. I don't expect it to take forever to do something. So I know I drive my staff absolutely crazy because I ask them all the time, why does it take so long? Half of it is because we just don't have people to do all of the things that need to be done.
Thank you very much. Secretary Fudge, I want to thank you for coming today. And for your ongoing partnership with both sides of the aisle on this committee and across the Senate. The hearing record will remain open until Friday, May 20th, to allow members to submit additional questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you so much.